Congratulations! We are at the finish line. We have one last piece of scope of work to do. That's to make those beloved press and hold camera preset recall buttons here in the text controller. And we're gonna do it in a really, really cool, slick, scalable way, because I promised you way back at the beginning, it's only gonna take like 30 lines of code. And I wasn't lying. It's gonna be really close to about 30, okay? But we're gonna do it. So what do we want to do here in this particular aspect of our scope of work? We want to build, obviously, press and hold camera presets. So what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? What new things are we going to learn? Actually, not much. We're gonna just use everything we already know. You actually are equipped. You have the knowledge and the skill to do this. Together, we will get it done. So here we are. We will control the cameras by reading and writing the PTZ coordinates via named components. Of course we are. It's my favorite way. We're going to use name timers. We're going to write event handlers for each press and hold. And then we're going to use functions. Of course we are. And we're going to get real feedback. And of course, these things, they're going to go in the UCI. So let's dig in. We need a text controller. Obviously, let's bring in a text controller. And I'm going to stick it right there. And let's give it a name. We're going to call this the old press hold text controller. There we are. And let's open it up. So let's think about what controls do we need in order to build this out. Let's think about how press and hold buttons work. When you poke the button, we're going to start a timer. If the timer goes ding, then that means we held it long enough, and that means we want to save. If, on the other hand, when we let go of the button, if the timer hasn't gone off, then that means we didn't hold it long enough. That means we want to recall. So with that in mind, we need to figure out what controls do we need. So Nate, let's think about it. Let's brainstorm together. What controls do we need in order to make all of this work?
Well, first things first, we need a button for them to press.
We
obviously.
Totally do need buttons for press and hold buttons. That was a pretty easy guess. But what kind of button?
Well, we actually want it to be a momentary button, don't
Why is that?
Because a toggle button stays on forever until you hit it again, and a trigger button doesn't even turn on at all. But a momentary button is only on in so much as you are still pressing it. So it needs to know when you start it and when you release it.
Yep, Nate is absolutely on the right track. Momentaries have the particular action of when you poke it, it has a transition, and when you release it, it has a transition. And so momentaries are the perfect button for us to choose for our press and hold, because we want to know when we poked it and when we unpoked it. Yes, that's the technical term, poke and unpoke. All right, so we are going to make them be momentary buttons, and we will call them BTN presets. All right, cool. And you know what? We can have many of them as we want. 3 feels like a pretty good answer. You want 4? Knock yourselves out. Okay, but 3 is fine. So there's 3. Okay. What else might we need or want? Well, we need a place to save that information. So a really great place to save that information is into a text box. So there's a text box right there. We will call it TXT storage. And once again, 3 of them, and it's going to be a text box. That looks good. All right.
I mean, it's probably worth noting that the reason it's a text box is because that's the field that we are controlling in the camera component itself, right? Like the cameras have a pan and tilt and a zoom coordinates. You would think those might be numbers, but in actuality, in our devices, if you look in the camera control panel, you see that it is a text box that has all 3 of those separated by spaces. So that is a text string that contains those 3 things that you might otherwise think might be numbers.
Yep, that's actually a really great observation. All right. In press and holds, one of the things that often comes up is, well, it needs to be a variable time length. Nate, what's a good tool? What's a good control for creating a variable time length?
We did this before. We had a little knob. We had a little second knob, right?
That's right. See, I told you, we know how to do this. So let's add a knob. All right, we're going to also call it KNB hold time. And here it is, knob. We're going to let it be an integer. We're going to set it from, oh my gosh, 100? No, 100 is way too much.
They really got to work to save that preset.
That seems like something Nate would do. I'm going to do something much more reasonable. We're going to set it from like 1 to 5. Right, 5 is probably the longest. Look, if it really needs to be longer, you know how to change this, but 1 to 5 is going to be fine. All right, what else? What else do we need? We want feedback, right? You want feedback, Nate? Yeah. Yes, the answer is yes, yeah. Nate. This is not a hard question.
So we need another text block that brings in the current coordinates?
No, we don't, actually. We will solve that problem in just a moment. But for our feedback, you might say, well, just use the momentary button. There's a problem, though. Do you remember when we did the shades and we were separating the control, right? The control surface from the feedback surface? Same thing here. Let's make use of some LEDs to be our feedback mechanism. Because if you think about our preset buttons, they're momentaries. Sometimes they're on, sometimes they're off. We don't want to try to get tied up with manipulating whether the Boolean is true or false on the preset for feedback purposes. We need to look at the Boolean of the preset buttons for control purposes, not feedback purposes. So let's make our own feedback mechanisms here. Let's make some LEDs. We're going to call them LED match. And there's 3 of them. And they will be indicator LEDs. That is awesome. Now, Nate had a good question. How are we actually going to get the PTZ coordinate information in and out of the old camera?
Yeah, like it feels like we need like another little box, right? Like we're saving these 3 bits of information, but we probably want like another box that we can put it into or take it out of after we pull it from our little vault. Yeah.
It's not a bad idea. And if we were using control pins, we might actually take that approach. But you know me, I don't want to use control pins. I want to use named components. And through the power of named components, I can talk directly to the camera, and the camera can talk directly to me. I don't need to configure controls to pass that information. I can just talk directly back and forth. But what I do need, Nate, if I'm going to use name controls, is a text box to hold the name of the name component.
So that you can put this in another design later on and type in the name of the component rather than dig into your Lewis.
Exactly. In this way, I'm picking names instead of figuring out where to wire flags. Nothing wrong with wiring flags. I like this way better. Anyway, it does kind of help with scaling. So there's that. What did we say this was going to be? This is going to be our text box. I had already clicked it. All right, so text camera code name. Text cam code name. And we're going to make it a text box. So there we are. So let's think. All right, we've got buttons for doing the work. We've got storage places to save the information. We've got a hold time to set, right? Because that needs to be able to be variable. We've got LEDs for whether we are matching the positions or not. And then lastly, the code name. We are doing good. Now, you may have noticed while we've been making this UCI that we typically would create these controls, then we would deploy them to our UCI and do all of the styling and everything, and then we would go write code. But let's be honest, by now, you know how to deploy controls, you know how to theme them, and frankly, there's a couple of different ways that really make sense about how these controls land on the UCI. Perhaps you are going to put 3 PTZ presets over there next to the left camera button and 3 PTZ presets over there next to the right button. You know what? That's perfectly fine. Another option that I think is pretty snazzy is actually pull out 2 sub layers, and depending on which camera you select, pull up that corresponding sub layer. Really, it's only limited by your creativity. But like I said, you actually already know how to do that. We don't need to spend precious training time at the moment doing that part of the exercise. You already got that figured out. And if you need to, simply go back and refer to how we did the USB sublayers. It's the same idea. So it's a thing, you already know how to do it. I'm gonna vote that we simply cut to the chase and let's start writing the script and seeing how this thing works. You good with that, Nate?
I've already finished my UCI. Sorry.
Awesome, fantastic.